Go. Hello, I'm here with Caitlin to talk about science, and it is January 5th, 2023. So, and that is, in fact, the first article I had. Well, here is an article on phys.org, very good website full of science things, and they say why some people don't trust science, which is, in fact, very interesting. And of course, this became a big issue for me when I watched all the people deny the effects of the COVID vaccine. But to be fair, this is nothing new at all. When I was a child in Pennsylvania, there were a lot of people I knew who believed the Earth was built in 4004 BC and humans did not evolve from other animals, and just a whole lot of blatantly unscientific things. And my father was a born-again Christian, and he always made a big deal of not praying about his scientific research because that would bias the results, which is a sort of entertaining, twisted logic. And my mom, of course, being a student of Plato, was well aware of Plato's arguments about how that kind of prayer and that concept of God makes no sense at all. But that had zero effect on Dad. It just bounced off his armor. And anyway, they talk about why this works. And they say people think that you can change people's minds about science by presenting them evidence and data, and that doesn't work at all. But they say what's going on is people don't trust science because they never have trusted science, and they just don't trust the authority figures that are giving them science. They trust other authority figures. And they talk about they do real psychology controlled research experiments to find out what's going on here. And what they find is the people that mistrust science know very little about science, and they think they know a lot. So it's like Dunning-Kruger effect. They feel like they understand it, they know it's all fraud, and their exaggerated sense of their comprehension of it feeds into this self-fulfilling system, and they don't really have the same standards of proof as people that do science. So they find it quite sufficient to come up with ad hominem attacks about how the scientists are all just crooks or something as proof that their non-scientific beliefs are true. And they say that, anyway, for a solution, they say one thing is to be aware that the messenger is as important as the message. You have to have someone that they regard as authoritative talking to them. And this, I think, is what Ailes did at Fox News. He said, the other news programs are boring and flat, and I need to have pretty people wearing bright colored clothing so they look attractive and interesting, and they need to make it punchy and fun, and then people will listen to it and believe it more. And that boring stuff will just blah, blah, that won't mean anything to them. And so anyway, they talk about this. So they find that the thing that really works is to tell people that the scientific beliefs are popular. Statements like 8 out of 10 cat owners say their cat prefers this brand of cat food are popular. These people, since they don't actually believe in the kind of authorities that us scientific types would believe in, they do believe in popularity. And it makes me think, Trump always brags about his numbers. The crowd was big, my ratings were high. And, I think Trump is a genius in understanding what this sort of people want to hear. So anyway.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. So in terms of Dunning-Kruger, there's a term for that. That's the top left. So if someone is top left, so if you think of the graph of things you don't know versus like things you're like confident in, like your confidence is really high the less you know. And then as you start to learn more about a subject, your confidence goes down. And then as you become an expert, it goes up a little bit again. And that's to the right. So if you're top left, you know very little and you're very confident of what you think you know. And a lot of science deniers absolutely fall into this. And
Yeah.
oh, go on.
No, I was never a science denier, but I do remember being a teenager. And when I was like 17, I thought I knew everything. I thought I had it all. Every class I was getting an A. I thought everything was easy, and I knew how it all worked.
I never fell into that trap, but that's only because I had really terrible self-esteem and I thought I was an idiot and I was stupid and I didn't get anything and everyone was smarter than me and everyone was more talented than me. So I did not fall into that trap. um, and so, but there's a lot of people out there that know very little and think they know better than experts. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that a lot of these people never took the time to master anything.
Yeah.
So they don't understand the amount of dedication and work it takes to become a real biologist or like someone who studies, geology or virology. They do not understand the level of detail that goes into that. If you become, say, a really good car mechanic, then the amount of work and effort it takes to become that skilled, right?
Oh, yeah.
But if you never get to that level where you master anything, you just think everyone is sort of at the same level as you,
Yes.
which, you know,
And another thing that contributed to this in my case was something I learned. When you take a course like a physics course, they don't teach you all the physics. They teach you a few carefully chewed over, pre-digested things that are artificially easy. So it looks a lot easier than it will be when you actually do real research.
exactly. Yeah, I mean, especially in school, everything is designed so that you can get through it. There's no like impossible puzzles. In the real world, when you do real work, you go into something like science or engineering, you'll be given problems where there's no solution.
That's
Yeah,
right.
that doesn't happen in school. That does not happen.
That's right. Everything, the answer to every question is in the chapter, and all you have to do is understand what they tell you. But of course, that's school.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and of course, at school, one big problem is that people learn a lot about theory, and then there's a difference between theory and practice, and that can trip people up when they start going into the real world.
and I must say, in the most recent example with COVID, I was also, I think we're all very frustrated. This is the problem when you have a dangerous disease and we really don't know what's going on. So for about a year, they didn't even know how it spread. Then they really didn't know how good the treatments and vaccines were. Then they had one idea and another idea come out and go. And you feel like these guys don't know anything, but that's the way it is. When you have a new thing, you're just trying to figure it out and you just jump from one approximation to another, which is really hard to put up with when it's important and you wish there was an answer right now, like a disease is killing people.
Yeah, I think a lot of the people who are skeptical don't understand the process of acquiring information and making judgments. You don't judge based on the fact that you have this godly understanding of everything in the world. You make judgments off of the information you have now.
That's right.
And so as the coronavirus got studied, those judgments changed. But the fact that they changed, a lot of people became skeptical because it's like, oh, you're saying this, now you're saying that. But that's just the natural way knowledge and progression in science goes forward.
Well, science is just not as great as we wish it was. You know, it,
Nope.
they really couldn't come up with like the right answer right away and save us all. Anyway, you've got human remains on the moon. What is this nonsense?
Yeah, so this is something that I've been thinking about for a while because it's kind of an interesting philosophical question that has come up recently. So I'm going to share my browser here. So this is on spacepolicyonline.com. I'm sure this site is a barrel of laughs. Space Policy Online. Anyway, so this is by Marcia Smith, and this was put up on January 4th. So just yesterday. So what's happening? So the Navajo Nation uh, got a hold that in the soon to be Artemis program landing, so NASA is sending people back to the moon this year.
Hmm?
They're going to be sending remains of people to be, scattered on the surface of the moon, in respect to them. So like famous scientists and stuff that requested that their ashes be sent to the moon. Well, the Navajo Nation heard about this and they're like, whoa, 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 wait a second. We were supposed to be, like informed and working with the US government, on these issues because, the moon to the Navajo people is very sacred. As it is to Western cultures as well. I mean, it's not just a Navajo thing, but to the Navajo people, they view putting, human ashes on the moon as sacrilege, essentially. And they've asked the president to essentially like put a hold on some of these missions, until they can have a meeting about this, essentially. And sure enough, the Biden administration is going to meet with the Navajo people to have a discussion about, how to handle, um, these sort of requests when people ask to have their ashes spread on the moon.
Well,
And so, oh, go on.
is it NASA? I couldn't understand this. It's Astrobiotic Peregrine, which is not
Mhm.
NASA, but it's on a NASA rocket. I mean, does NASA control this or not?
Um, so okay, so let's see. So it says here, I'm just going to read the thing.
Yeah.
So NASA said today the Biden administration will consult the Navajo Nation. This is all quotes. This is not my work. I don't want to be a plagiarist. About his concerns that human remains are going to be placed on the moon. To uh, developed through the agency's Commercial Lunar Payload Services Program.
So what is that?
So
That's where you can rent space on a NASA vehicle for a commercial for.
there's a lot of commercial government collaboration at NASA.
Well, sure, but what that means is NASA could say no.
They could say no. Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Um,
Whereas
so
if
yeah,
you guys were like to hire a SpaceX rocket to send it up there, then NASA would just have nothing to do with it.
but NASA apparently has no control over the non-NASA payloads. So NASA is going to be sending payloads up with it,
Well,
apparently, but the non-NASA payloads they have nothing to do with.
no, but if it's on a NASA rocket, I'm sure they wouldn't let us send up a nuclear bomb in the non-NASA payload. I mean, they've got to have some standards.
But I mean that's more FAA and NASA rules. I mean you can't break the FAA rules when you send up a rocket, regardless of if
Well,
it's
but
by NASA.
I suppose you could complain that it's offensive on religious grounds or violating
Yeah,
some civil rights, and that might be a good enough reason to stop it.
yeah, maybe. And so we'll see. But anyway, regardless, I mean that's what's going on. We're deciding whether or not we need to stop this or not. So anyway, so this is going to be part of the Tranquility flight. Let's see. So Luna 1, let's see, blah, blah, blah. Who I want to get to the okay, so yeah, so the Navajo Nation, Bu Nigren, said that they've learned that there would be cremated remains of people being sent on this lander. And they're asking for the launch to be postponed. And
Hmm.
so let's see, there's okay, here's a quote from Nygren from the article. At NASA, they're trying to send human remains to the moon. As Navajo people, we hold the moon in such high sacredness and also respect that humans, animals, and insects and fish and all plants come from the earth, and they should be returned to the earth, not to the moon.
Yeah.
So this is somewhat offensive to these, Native Americans.
But
And
Peregrine is not a NASA launch or a government launch. It's a
no,
commercial.
it is, but it's still being overseen by the FAA and NASA. So regardless, I mean, you wouldn't want to like send up, for example, airplanes that are offensive. The FAA might, get involved with that, for example,
Well,
even if it's your own private airplane.
well, Elon Musk sends up all these SpaceX rockets, and I think there's been very wide latitude. He could send up anything he wants on them.
Yeah, but he would probably get in trouble if he put profanity on his rockets.
Boy, I don't know. I'm not sure that would really violate any laws.
It might not, but the FAA, because no one's tried it, as far
Yeah,
as I know. But I imagine the FAA would probably get involved at that point, or NASA. Both NASA and FAA, by the way, regulate
yeah,
space and air flight. So, anyway, yeah, so the president Joe Biden
yeah,
had agreed to talk with the Navajo Nation
yeah.
and see how this is going to play out. So, what are your thoughts, Sam?
Well, I'm just trying to understand the issues. So we're about to establish a permanent lunar base with permanent human habitation, right? So after a
Correct.
while, some of those people are probably going to die and get buried on the moon. And I guess the Navajos are going to get mad about that too.
Maybe. I mean, it's also. I mean, my first thought when I heard that people were upset that we'd be sort of disgracing the moon with human cremated ash, my first thought was wait till they find out what we do with our poop on the moon.
That's right. And then what are you going to do when people start getting born on the moon? Now what the hell? I think at some
Yeah.
point the religion is going to have to cope with the changing circumstances that make your old traditions less and less relevant.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's really important, I think, for us to listen to the Navajo people. But at the same time, I don't think, the moon is sacred to the Navajo people, that's no doubt, but it's sacred to every culture, in existence, not just the Navajo people. It's sacred to the indigenous people of South America, to other Native American tribes, to Western cultures. Even in the Bible, some of the first lines in Genesis talked about how God created the moon.
Well,
So,
on the
you
other
know,
side, I don't see any reason for anybody to send a bunch of cremains up to the moon. That also seems to me utterly pointless. Why would you do that?
but yeah, that's true too. But the moon belongs to everyone. It is not under the domain
Yeah,
of the U.S. government. It is not under the domain of of the Navajo people. So, anything that's done on the moon really has to be cooperated. There has to be cooperation between, everyone involved. And so I'm really glad the Navajo people are being heard. With that said, I don't think that we're going to be that I don't think they're going to be able to stop, people being cremated and having their final resting place on the moon.
well, I bet it would be a good commercial business. In fact, I knew a company that would drop your cremains out of an airplane and you'd pay money for that. And I bet if you
Yeah,
offered to drop your cremains on the moon, people would pay $1 million for that.
yeah, absolutely,
And
absolutely.
I wouldn't mind, but I guess the Navajos wouldn't like it.
They wouldn't. But that's part of living in a multicultural society is that you have to work with your neighbors who,
Yeah,
might have different ideas about what's offensive and what's not. And,
yeah,
just sometimes you just have to agree to disagree. But it's important to take everyone's concerns seriously. And I'm glad that the president is meeting with the Navajo people.
yeah. You can solve it with fine democratic principles like which side provided the largest bribe. Anyway,
Exactly. But anyway,
oh,
but it gives you a lot to think about, like, should we, how should we go forth, exploring the universe when, there are certain religious, beliefs among certain people, especially, like I said, like, yeah, I mean, if they think that leaving ashes on the moon is disrespectful, wait till they find out. So, like, when Apollo went to the moon, they obviously did not take their poop and pee with them back up to the rocket. They just left it in bags
yeah,
on the lunar surface.
yep.
I mean, if I would think anything is disrespectful to the moon, it's that. But there's really no choice if
Yeah,
you
no, they
are
don't
in
want
these
to dump it.
situations. Yeah,
No, I've read
yeah,
about this. The later missions found all the piles of junk left by the previous missions.
yeah, exactly.
So,
And now they're going to become historic sites, except for, of course, the poop, which I'm sure will be cleaned up eventually.
that's the
But
same thing on Mount Everest. The dead bodies and all the junk left over by the previous expeditions are there.
exactly, exactly. So, we really need to think about places like the moon, places like Mount Everest.
Yeah,
How can we be environmental about maintaining these areas which have cultural and religious significance, but might also, you know, sort of be a site where you kind of sort of have to leave your garbage. I mean,
yeah. All right.
no.
Well, anyway, the Chaos Communication Congress is meeting, and they have a good talk and a paper to go, a summary to go with it here. These guys used hardware hacking techniques to voltage glitch a Tesla, and they got root on the Tesla, and they even claim to have accessed Elon mode, which is apparently a secret high privilege mode present on Teslas. Um, and so it makes sense. They show how they rooted it using voltage glitching. They could extract arbitrary code and user data from the system, and they extract a hardware unique key used to authenticate it towards Tesla's mothership. So anyway, Tesla's like smartphones are this strange thing where you buy something and yet you don't have full privileges on it. You have to jailbreak it to get full access to it, and they've done it for better or worse. I Now I think the next thing we need is like custom firmware to put in your Tesla to give it totally different features. And boy, there would be legal issues.
Yeah, I mean, it is very weird that we can buy computers now that we don't fully control. Like you buy an iPhone
Yeah.
and you're not really supposed to be able to root it, but it's your iPhone.
Same thing's true of your smart TV. And it was true
Yeah,
of your Bell telephone back in the old days. Your dumb phone, you were not supposed to mess with it. You're not allowed to
yeah.
build your own. Um, you have a end user license agreement that gives you some rights, but not full rights.
It- yeah, we probably need to think about extending our laws to prevent that sort of behavior in the future, but that's not a hill I'm gonna die on with everything else going on in the world.
Yeah, it's closely related to the right to repair movement, right?
Yeah,
But most people just want to use things the way they are. And you could just build your own car.
that's true.
But anyway, it sure be a whole lot easier to just hack your Tesla. All right. Anyway, and you got drones with drugs. Now there's a progress. There's scientific progress.
Right. Actually, you know what? I forgot to do something. Let me. Boop. So behind me is the Crab Nebula.
Hmm.
And so these reddish lines in the nebula is hydrogen alpha emissions, as usual. Usually in my photographs, if you see lots of red clouds, that's hydrogen alpha.
Hmm.
Um, and in the center, there's like this white mist, and that is actually being lit up in the center by a neutron star, a magnetar, that is giving off a lot of magnetic field lines. And if you look really closely with a better telescope, you can actually see in the white area where the field lines are because it's that strong.
Hmm.
And what's really interesting about the Crab Nebula is that it was a supernova spotted in the year, I think like around 1040 something.
Yeah.
And a lot of people noted it. So it's a relatively recent supernova. And you can actually watch over time as the nebula expands because it is technically recently supernovaed, so it's still sort of expanding quickly. And if you take an image now and you compare it to an image like 100 years ago, you can see it getting larger and larger and larger.
Now, is it because it's a neutron star that it has those filaments coming out? Because some of them, like the Ring Nebula, just seem to be expanding like a smooth sphere.
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know if it's because it's a neutron star inside. Um, Definitely, the neutron star does affect the nebula
Yeah.
for sure. It might just be that this is just such a new nebula. That's where the chaos comes in. Everything hasn't dispersed yet um,
Yeah.
evenly. Although it is very large. I mean, it's several light years, I think, at this point
Yeah.
in
Something has
size.
given
But
it a lot of structure. Some parts
absolutely,
expanded much faster than others for some reason.
absolutely,
Yeah.
probably having to do with the rotation of the original star in there.
Yeah, but it's sort of random and chaotic. It's not
Yeah.
any simple pattern at all. It looks like a turbulent fluid, which I think
Hmm.
maybe the plasma was turbulent.
I'm sure it's quite turbulent in there. And when we say turbulent, I mean it's still very close to a vacuum. It's just there's a
Yeah.
higher percentage of hydrogen there than other
Yeah,
places.
I don't know if anything that uh, dispersed can really be turbulent, but I guess it'd be interesting to find out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
All right.
anyway, that I took that I think on Sunday or Monday. Yeah, I think it was Monday night. Anyway, so
How
that's
long
the Crab
did it
Nebula.
take to make that image?
A few hours. So the image is a combination. It's a composite of uh, images taken with a hydrogen alpha oxygen 3 filter and a just standard UVIR filter. So the stars are in true color, whereas the nebula, I tried to get its true color, but if you try to capture the nebula in UVIR, it just looks like a smudge. So in order to get the contrasting um, gases, I used the dual filter, the hydrogen alpha and oxygen 3 filter.
So it's not really that red.
So yes and no. This is the true color of the nebula. The problem is that even if you were to stare at the nebula in total darkness, you wouldn't see it.
Right.
So it is really red. And when you see it's red, it's really that red. The problem is it's so faint, it
So
doesn't
if you
look
used
like.
a telescope with huge light gathering power, like the Palomar, so you could see it
Mhm.
with naked eye, it would look that red.
It would. Now I did enhance some of the colors, the vibrancy of the reds to make it stand out a little bit more. But this is not a false color image. This is
Hmm.
very much a true color image. And in fact, if you look to the left, you'll see a little bit of blue here, um, which is sort of hard to see.
Oh yeah.
But that's the oxygen 3. So oxygen 3 is doubly ionized oxygen that emits a nice blue hue of light. So
Oh, very nice. All right.
all right. So anyway, next article. New and cheap, and they don't snitch. Drones are the new drug mill. So this is on Vice. Let me pull this up here. And this is by Max Daly. And so criminals are, of course, always on the forefront of new technology. And we're seeing the rise of drones being used to deliver drugs. In particular, they talked about in India, they were using drones to essentially transport opioids, to customers. And so, even before Amazon can get their package delivery drones out, the drug cartels are already using drones to do their transporting. So that's interesting.
Yeah, makes sense. I mean, and I think as we've all found, there's really not an easy way to shoot down a drone. So how would you know what it's carrying?
It's not easy. You can disrupt the signals technically. It shooting it down is another question. Um,
What I've heard is that if it loses radio contact, most of them will just fly back home, but I'm not sure.
yeah, they'll try to fly back home if they lose radio contact. And then like the problem is that most drones use either like microwave transmissions. Usually it's microwave transmissions, or at least UHF transmissions to control them, which means that they are limited by the horizon. So, you still have to be relatively close to the drones to control them or very high up so you can increase your horizon. But either way, it's kind of you can't really get a drone to go that far. You can just have it like hop around pretty much.
Yeah, it seems like it could serve the purpose of drug mule though, because if even if they've somehow if they grabbed the drone and said there's drugs in it, it wouldn't be easy for them to tell who sent that drone.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly. So they could, I mean, the way I imagine you would want to use it would be like you want to give someone drugs,
right,
they pay for it. And then instead of giving them the drugs in person, you send the drone,
right.
which then if it's a sting, they get the drone, but
That's right.
the people are, yeah.
Exactly the same thing you use mules for. Makes sense.
Yep.
Yeah. All right. And anyway, the last one got quite a bit of attention. There were just last week, the Iranians attacked a water plant in Pennsylvania and they defaced the page. You have been hacked, down with Israel by cyber avengers. And this helps advertise and make obvious the deplorable situation of OT security, which is why I wrote a class in it and I've got a contracting gig in it. It's the new hotness. Everyone is being made aware of how extremely unsafe the technology running our infrastructure is, and how all our critical infrastructure is pretty much vulnerable. And they really need to beef up the security. And the problem is you have legacy infrastructure from a long time ago with no encryption, no passwords, no nothing running these things. And then you connect it to the internet, and there's a problem there, of course. And there are various defenses you can put in. The most obvious one being network segmentation with things like firewalls and VPNs. But there are other things. And so anyway, this is getting people's attention to the problem, which is big. And now there's a lot of interest in people learning OT security and training people to go secure all this infrastructure. So,
Absolutely.
yeah. All right. And you've got, this is great. This is related to the event that Doug was talking about. The new survivalists, I think.
Yeah, the new survivalists. So for a while now, we've heard about these billionaires building bunkers
Yeah.
for the apocalypse and everything. Uh, it's gotten kind of out of hand at this point. So I'll share the article at this point. So this is by newrepublic.com. And by the way, the New Republic is sort of this left-leaning newspaper. So some of the language is intentionally sort of shifted to the left. But the what's happening is that Solano County, which is north of San Francisco in California, is being bought up by a bunch of tech billionaires because they essentially want to create their own little like city. And what I mean is by city is like I don't mean something like, this techno, futuristic city like what's that one at Disney World, Epcot Center. What they're trying to do is buy up enough land so that they can secede from the government
Right.
and basically create like this like haven for the billionaires so that when everything goes haywire, the billionaires will have their own like little insulated city. And on the plus side, they don't have to pay taxes, which we all know all the billionaires, that's all they care about is their goddamn taxes. Um, and it's like, it's such a dystopian view of the world, right? And I don't understand where this is coming from. So I mean, we talked about this before. Like, there's some theories, like this idea of the cycle and everything like that, where they think that humanity's is doomed for like a downfall. I mean, and society has its ups and down
Yeah.
times. Very rarely do we see a complete collapse of everything.
Well, I was talking about it just this weekend in my AI class. I said, the people in Silicon Valley believe this Scientology-like garbage that they are the saviors of the world, and they believe that AI is going to make robots that will control the universe and wipe us out. And they just live in this science fiction fantasy of personal importance, where they
Yeah,
they can't just admit, I just make a product like a hamburger and I sell it and I make money and I'm not any different than a plumber or anybody else, which is the truth. They imagine that they are these all-powerful godlike beings from a comic book.
it's worse than that because they think that the world is going to end, or at least there's going to be some major catastrophe.
Yeah.
And instead of trying to prevent the catastrophe, they're just trying to create a lifeboat for them and their friends.
Right.
Like,
This is a way for them to feel important. They are the master race, like Elon Musk says, my genes are superior. I must spread my genes and exterminate the other inferior races. You know, it's
yeah,
it's
no, yeah, no, and of course, and it's a big problem too because what they're doing to in order to create this county is they're buying up land, sometimes at like inflated prices, and some people don't want to sell. And then, according to the article, they would send these people to they would sue these people for not selling their property and call them greedy.
yeah. And
Like
and
these,
you know, and they imagine that they really could live all by themselves and they're not actually held up by the infrastructure of the government and the military and the electric utilities and everything, which is just garbage.
yeah, and tech people more than anyone should know the importance of infrastructure. I'm sitting here at my computer that's running off electricity generated by solar power and both on the roof and elsewhere, as well as by hydroelectric power. There's a few coal plants nearby. And all that is getting the power to my computer. I know where the transformer station is to my house. I know where the kilovolt to 220 transformer is outside. Then of course there's the water, which I need to take a shower so I can be presentable on the camera. That came from the water came from the Hetch Hetchy, which then gets piped to my house, and I've used the toilet, and that goes to the sewer system, which gets sent to this. Anyway, that's the sewer systems, and of course there's like all the property and upkeeps, and then of course there's the bureaucracy that made sure that the building I'm in is safe, so that if there's an earthquake, I'll be safe. There's of course smoke detectors by law that have to be installed in each of the rooms because if there's a fire, God forbid, I'll be safe and my cat's going to be safe because they have all these things. Anyway, all this infrastructure is all over the place, right?
Yeah.
And it it's just part of technology. You can't have technology without infrastructure. And they don't get this. They do not get this at all. They think that
Yeah.
they're completely independent. They could just set up some solar panels and they'll be fine. That's not the way things work. How are you going to get rid of your garbage? You
Yeah.
need you need a landfill for your freaking garbage. I'm sorry, garbage does not disappear when you throw it in the trash.
Yeah. And that's why I feel like the most honest character in these camps is Kim.com. He said, I watch James Bond movies and I want a lair like the villain has with like women in bikinis around the pool and sharks in the tank. And he built that. That's why I need millions of dollars to live like a James Bond villain. He just admitted what he's doing. These guys are pretending it's high-minded, but that's all it is.
Yeah, no, seriously. I mean, I want to live like a supervillain, and I do. I have my evil genius layer here, and it's fantastic. But I'm not pretending to save the world.
Well, you don't have a swimming pool full of sharks or anything.
Well, I mean, I have a cat named Astro Cat,
You
and
have
I
much
have
you have a much more modest level of supervillainy going on.
that's true. That's true.
And it's like I don't feel like I need a gun because I'm just a human like everybody else. Just like everybody else, I can call the cops if I get in trouble, and that's good
Exactly.
enough. I don't need to have any more power than that.
Good point. The other thing, the other infrastructure they don't think about are cops, the fire department,
Yeah.
like schools.
You,
I mean,
you,
they think a little bit about schools. They think like, oh, we're just going to privately educate all our kids in this place. But you need, oh, good, there's so many resources, museums,
it's in the
zoos.
Bible, no man is an island. You think
Yes.
that you're independent. Nonsense. You're part of a society and a culture and a nation and all this stuff.
Yeah, and I mean, and I'm actually not against people forming like little communities and then forming governments on that very small level, like have a block government where people are like, oh, we need to plant trees on the sidewalk here, and then have that be sort of underneath the city government, Like I'm not against, that granularity, but you part of good governments is having that like stacked layers. So you have like the city, then you have the county, then you have the state and then the federal government, and they all sort of have their domain and uses. And we can pull our resources together at every level, depending on what's needed by the populace. And when you go all independent, it's like you don't realize how many of those resources you're giving up.
Well, and the fact is, you need a national government because there are other nations that really will invade with like military and kill us if you
Yes.
don't have a government at that level to protect you. It's like you're like a leaf on the end of a branch on a tree saying, I'm just going to live alone. I don't need this tree anymore. I'll just cut that stem and I'll be fine.
Exactly. So it's sort of, I mean, I don't think that the Solano County or whatever Solano district that they want to build. I think they're going to call it Praxis or something, but whatever they're planning to build, I don't think they're going to be invaded. But if they do get invaded, I mean, that would be a really interesting question for the US government because they secede, but they're on essentially like they're surrounded by US territory. And if North Korea decides to go in
Yeah.
and take over,
I think the same thing would happen if somebody invaded like one of the tribal reservations that are technically not part of the United States.
yeah,
They're
yeah.
an independent nation, and you couldn't just charge them with the army without them inviting you or something.
Yeah, I mean, but with the independent nations of indigenous people, they're supposed to be sort of cooperating with the U.S. government. They're not really they're more like brother and sister. They're not
Mhm.
like completely independent like they want for Praxis or whatever.
Well, this reminds me
Like,
of the Bitcoin islands. You remember they had the videos
yes.
last year of all these people going to make a utopia of techno people on their island as if they can do that. And there are people
Yeah.
that do this, like the Amish. The Amish really do have a farm and grow apples and abandon all of the rest of the world and pretty much are self-sufficient. But that's not the kind of thing they're pretending they're going to end up with here.
No, no, absolutely not. And even the Amish, though, they still have access to the police and the fire department and, public libraries and roads and stuff like that. I mean, they're not as they're more independent than the rest of us.
Yeah.
And that's a good, and there's benefits to be had about, maybe saying, I want my house or my building to be run on renewable energy and generate its own solar power. I mean, certainly hospitals, for example, need to be able to generate their own electricity.
Yeah.
And
Have
the
your own
Amish
little
get
nuke,
spiritual. Yeah,
have your own little portable nuke plant too
yeah,
now.
yeah. And yeah, the Amish, of course, get spiritual fulfillment from being independent and living off the land, and hard work. But that you still live in a society. They're still protected by the U.S. military. There's plenty of things that the Amish use. In fact, you know what? They make special computers for the Amish.
No, I don't.
They do. They do. So the
This
thing
is
about
not
the
a
Amish,
joke.
not a joke. So the thing about the Amish is that they're not actually against technology. They're just against frivolous technology. So sometimes they do need to like type stuff up. So there are special computers made for the Amish that will not let them like play games or like browse the web or anything, but that will let them use like a word processor.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think
Yeah,
that's almost a Chromebook. I mean, you could totally make a machine like that.
exactly. Yeah. So
Yeah.
there are like computers. They're not anti-technology. They Amish do use technology. Don't they just want to be bare essentials essentially. So,
Yeah, well, that's not
you know,
yeah, perfectly fine. It's like being a monk. You
exactly.
remove all the polluting corruption of the world and live a simpler life.
Mhm.
Well, all right. Well, that's it for this one, and there'll be another one on Tuesday. Let me see if I can find the button that makes it stop recording. There we go.